In the show today, I'm talking to Blair, Bryant, Nichols. We had a wonderful conversation talking about how speaking can be used to really enhance your business. A lot of speakers go into the world of speaking for the sake of speaking. What Blair advocates for is actually finding something you're passionate about, how you can bring your story alive, but actually how you can then use that to help sell your main business. Think about your main products. I think there's some great points here that he comes up with, and really ones that made me think about this when I talk about speakers themselves. The key that's going to come back here, of course, is in speaking and connecting to stories, that connection authentically and emotionally. We've had a number of speakers on this podcast before where we talk about this and thinking about those, but this really connects that story back to the bigger issue of speaking. So as you go through, listen out and help yourself understand what your main message is and why you might want to use speaking as a message medium to drive your business forwards.
It's great to be here.
Thank you. It's interesting, actually, as I was reading your script then, I suddenly thought, hey, there's me stumbling over the words. You know, I've read scripts before, and I think one of the keys of getting a great speech out is to have it in your memory. And I wonder, we're going to dive into lots of things as we go here. And one of the thoughts I've got around speaking is, how do you help speakers deliver their message? You talk about lots of things in your bio there. I'd love to find out a bit about you as we go. But before we start, just give me a quick words on who is Blair and why are we talking today?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, I've got my own company, BBN Creative Management, and I've been working in and around the speaking, publishing kind of business worlds my entire career. It's not something I sought out. It's not something I imagined as a young boy that someday I'd be working with corporate speakers and people who go to conferences, but it's kind of where I fell into when I started out in publishing. And now through it, I had a lot of experiences seeing, what speakers were popular and what speakers got the most attention and who, really probably deserved more attention. So I decided to put my focus more on diverse and purpose-driven talent and entrepreneurs and different types of leaders, because those are the people that I aligned with. Those are the people that I really enjoyed working with. And as I've been able to carve out my career, I've just tried to be intentional about the most important things to me, and that was getting to choose who I worked with. I think that's such a luxury that not everyone has. And after having some not so great work experiences throughout my career, I really wanted to make sure that I was trying to at least set my mission for the people that I most wanted to serve in my industry as well.
Yeah, I love that. And that word purpose driven, I think, when we talk about purpose driven, the Sparks by Ignium podcast is all about these purpose driven organizations. And I love that point you make there about choosing who you work with, because I think that's something that's really important to a lot of people. But a lot of people don't realize they have the choice to do that, or don't enable themselves to have the choice. So what is it for you about purpose driven that brings you alive?
Yeah, well, I mean, I had a boss early on in my career that said speaking is not a vocation, it's an avocation. And that always stuck with me, because I think there are a lot of people who've looked at speaking as a paycheck. And of course, it can be quite lucrative for some people, but like any media industry, it's the few that it's lucrative for, and the many that it's, maybe reasonable for. But if it's not something that you care about, if it's not an avocation for you, then you're not going to be successful. First of all, you're never going to rise above kind of the standard presenter or trainer or someone that's really just there to kind of share their subject matter expertise, because it's that avocation, that piece of it that really makes you stand out. And when someone is working for a greater mission, I think it helps fuel all of our work. We live in an age of constant burnout cycles from working all the time in this digital age. So you have to really want to do what you're doing. People in the millennial generation and younger especially are really aligned with brands and people that have a purpose or a social mission. And I think that also relates to our work. And when it comes to talent, and when it comes to big egos, and when it can come to, working with sometimes difficult situations or a lot of different personalities, if the underlying mission isn't there, then it makes it a lot harder to, put up with those challenges and everything else. And that's, again, why also I'm really intentional about not working with divas or jerks and people, because they're also not going to be your best clients. People aren't going to want to book them again. So there's a lot of reasons, to want to go in that direction, the people who actually have a mission in this world, the people who are really doing it for a greater purpose.
Yeah,
They
I
might
love.
have, like a monetary purpose, but they also might funnel right into their nonprofit, or it might, just be part of what they do, even though they may not need the money
Mm,
necessarily, but it allows them more opportunities to share their message.
mm.
And so they'll do it, even if, the time is not even really as valuable to them as they could be doing something else.
Yeah, I love that, and I love that thing about that you've got to have that advocation for it. I think that's a great phrase. And I wonder, as business owners, and I've been running my business just over 20 years now, and I joined Toastmasters in the UK back in 2006 or maybe seven. And I did that because I remember going to an event and I heard this lady speaking, and I thought, wow, you've got an amazing ability. And I went up and talked to her about it, and she told me about Toastmasters. Now, Toastmasters is just one of the organizations out there. There's in the UK, we've got the PSA as well. There's other organizations as well. So, I'm not aligned to one specifically. But I wonder, what is it for you about when you're finding speakers? I found that lady and she introduced me to Toastmasters and it helped me in my business. But a lot of people don't realize they've got a talent in speaking in the first place. How do you help someone who maybe hasn't recognized they've got a talent or is just too nervous to stand up and do it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great question, because usually the question is more so like, how do I develop that talent, or how do I get better at being a
Mm,
speaker? But there are definitely people who are gifted speakers who could use some direction. There's that unconscious competence that we can be
mm.
blessed with, but it takes that conscious, kind of competence to really get better at what you're doing and perfecting what you're doing. So
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
seen a lot of people who, you have seen them present. A lot of times that's where people do kind of rise from. That's why PR podcasts, kind of like when authors first start out, that's a great way to kind of start hearing them kind of present their ideas that may grow into speaking. So there has been instances where, people haven't been on a platform or a stage yet, but they've begun doing interviews, they've begun doing their PR, like when I've worked with authors on their first books or things like that. And that's where you can pull out like, oh, that's really what we need to build this a
Yeah,
keynote around. I mean, oftentimes that's not just it. So I guess just to answer your question, there is times where, the things that they're saying kind of, again, unconsciously, and they're just really great at articulating,
yeah,
are become what are like the building blocks of maybe a keynote, or what we then, kind of use for bigger messaging. But
yeah,
most of the time it's more about helping people get over that fear, getting
yeah,
over like the mental obstacle of doing it. And that's, I love, again, Toastmasters is a great place to practice, because
yeah,
you're around peers and like-minded people who want to get better at this,
yeah,
who are supportive, and give you a very structured way to practice this, which
yeah,
is difficult because you can practice in front of a mirror, you can practice at home, but it's not going to be the same as standing in front of an audience, because
yeah,
that's the scary part.
yeah,
So I definitely think if that's kind of where you're beginning, that's an absolutely great place to begin. I always tell
yeah,
people just to get started wherever they can speak, because you just don't know until you
yeah.
actually try.
I think that's a great thing. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because you and I stand here talking about that. And it sounds very easy for us to say that. But some people, some business owners just don't have that thinking about, getting into the speaking world, because they see it as they see speakers and then they see themselves. And there's some form of stage fright there, or they've been through some traumatic experience, but could just be, being forced to speak when they're at school and it's stuck with them all those years. So there is such a thing as stage fright. Do you have tips that you give your your people, your speakers, on how to overcome some of those, stage butterflies that are all there before they stand up and give their keynote?
Yeah, I love that question. And when I'm with a speaker, especially if I'm on site or just talking about, an engagement in advance, what I always
Yeah,
like to remind them is that they're there to give a gift. They're not there as a performer, they're not there to be judged or critiqued. Most of the time it's a friendly audience. They're there to enjoy this gift that's being given to them by their company or the conference that they've invested in. And so, they need to deliver value as a speaker, but their value is their gift, and that's what they're
yeah,
there to do. And I think that's helped a lot of people kind of reframe how they feel going out there, and kind of settle kind of their nerves when it does feel, to most of us in these situations, we're used to feeling, judged or critiqued,
Yeah.
and kind of being in that mindset. So I think that's kind of like my only like real presentation, like, any calming exercises and breathing and all of that can help. And being
Yeah.
really well rehearsed really
Yeah.
can help. But to your point, you don't want to feel like you're scripted, where
Yeah.
you're so structured that you can't sound natural. But that's where being well rehearsed allows you to just hopefully, speak really from the heart. And if you
Mhm.
stumble over words or you forget a line, no one will know. Like, it doesn't matter,
Yeah.
you might know, but they won't know.
Yeah.
So the practice, the kind of understanding, like, that this, whatever happens live, like, you just kind of got to roll with it. And you might know that you missed something, but the audience won't. And then back to like, what's your intention? Like,
Yeah.
it's such a great opportunity as a business owner to grow your brand, to grow your business. You're impacting people, you're connecting to them, you have an opportunity to tell your story. You can go to an event, and how many hands can you shake and how many business cards can you exchange?
Yeah.
But when you're up on stage, you're getting to in front of everyone. That's money that people pay. People
Yeah.
pay money to speak at events
Yeah.
because it's their ideal audience. It's a
Yeah.
very powerful and effective tool
Yeah.
for business development, marketing, everything.
I love that. I love that. And I think you're right, actually, isn't it? In the sense that, when you're up there, it is such an amazing opportunity to be there and you have people listening to you. So there's something there about, using speaking as a platform to promote your business message. I want to come back saying, and actually, as you were talking there, actually, I was thinking, when you were talking about that your value is your gift, and you're not there to be critiqued. The Billie Jean King quote comes to mind there about pressure is a privilege. And I think there's something there about, whether when you're playing whatever it is in front of the audience, treat that as a privilege. You may feel the pressure, but that's why you're there. And I
Mm-hmm.
really feel that whenever I think of, standing up on stage and feeling those pre-night butterflies, I think, hey, if you can stand up and play tennis in front of the world as she did, that's an amazing ability. And that's that privilege that comes out. So,
Oh, definitely. And I think hear speakers say, like a lot of performers, and if you're not still getting the butterflies, then like, you're not in it for the right reasons, or
yeah,
something's wrong, because I think that's important. I think
yeah,
that feeling of that, will still fuel, a much better overall experience.
yeah,
But I agree. I think that pressure is a privilege, and I love that quote. I don't think I've
yeah.
heard that before.
I think that just says it for me. I think in that sense. So I think when I think back to my early days in business, which was I said 20 years ago now, um, speaking became something that I've developed over the years, and I love doing it. Um, when you're thinking about the two things there about connecting people in terms of that, being up on stage, connecting with the right people, what type of tips would you give someone who wants to get into speaking, but then they don't want to be known as a speaker? They want to be known as a business person, and they just happen to be using speaking as their conduit to get to market. As you say, they could go to conferences or seminars. They just have to be speaking. What tips would you want? Because obviously, think about the audience for this show. A lot of the people out there are running medium to sized businesses. They're looking at growing. They may or may not have thought about it. So I wonder what tips you could give them about if they're considering using this as a tool to get up on platform. What would you suggest they go and do?
Sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, if they're, a small or medium-sized business owner, they're probably spend a fair amount of time understanding who their customer is and who their ideal clients are,
Yeah.
and who their audience that they're trying to attract. And if they've tried other advertising or marketing investments like Facebook ads or other things like that, where, they might have been able to quantify, like, how much does it cost to acquire a client, they might
Yeah.
actually understand the hard numbers for, we spend X number of dollars or pounds on, on advertising, and we get X number of clients. Like, that's usually, something that they can figure out. So
Yeah.
just speaking in like business terms, there's a cost to getting new customers. So if you knew there were events or places where your ideal customers gather, if you focus on specific industries, if you have niches of,
Mm.
we serve the chief commercial officers, and so we're going to go to their conference, or we talk directly to HR, so we're going to look into HR conferences. I could give 1,000 examples, but I think you understand, if you're focusing on your niche of who you actually
Mm.
want to reach and who actually could be a buyer either for your product or service, and you are going directly to them, whatever that event may look like. I mean, this is not dissimilar to a trade show model. It's just elevating a trade show model or any sort of industry, direct to consumer model that's been disrupted by digital. And we all know that can also make those costs that much higher. So that's why I started with how much does it cost for you to get a client digitally? And then how much would it cost for you to sponsor this event? And in part of that sponsorship, either include or ask and negotiate a speaking slot where you are the expert now on your subject. Obviously, people understand in these contexts that you might then like offer a free resource or something that gets like them to, give you their contact information, or you might even be able to directly offer, something that they can purchase right away, or they can then meet you at your booth or something, but you're directly in front of ideal clients that can purchase immediately. Think about the sales cycle that you usually go through. Think about finding those decision makers. Think about all of the different relationship building things you have to do. You're instantly credentializing yourself. You're giving credibility, you're giving value. And if you're doing it well, you're connecting to them emotionally, which is what makes them want to buy in the first place. Because you're telling a story. You're not just pitching your product. You're not just talking about your amazing idea. You're telling a story. You're providing value. You're telling another story. And then you're opening the door for them to want to, talk with you. Now they know you. Now they've gotten like a warm introduction. Maybe now they read your book. It really depends, of course, on what your goals are, but that's such a powerful way. And like maybe you spent maybe you spent 20 grand to to be a sponsor at this event, but you get 2 6-figure clients. It can really exponentially expand what people look at when they think about speaking. When you compare that to getting 5, 10, 15, 20 grand every time you speak, and people think that's incredible. It is incredible, but wouldn't that be a lot better time spent of you on the road doing all these things? Like, and obviously we're talking down the road when you've had more success as a speaker or whatever, but I try to reframe people's thinking about what success looks like in this industry, because so many people are driven by how many dates can I book and how high can I get my fee up? But every time you speak, you could be turning that into like 10 times more money if you're thinking about how you're driving that audience either to your email list, at least if nothing else, and then beyond that to future products or services. And so that's where I like kind of differentiate myself too in this industry. Is a lot of it is just driven by the brokering of the speaking and the general strategy there and the growing of that, which is great. But I want my clients to go beyond that, because we could have another 2020. We could have another time where if all you're relying on and you're like, I'm making hundreds of thousands of dollars every year, it's all from live speaking. Now I'm making nothing. Well, I don't want them to experience that again. And I've also spent years in this industry with speakers making millions of dollars on speaking and never trying to optimize those things. I can only imagine how much money they would have been making if they had. And there's a lot of people who've been doing this for a long time. And there's a reason why Tony Robbins is so successful. It's because he's been turning speaking into bigger coaching and bigger things from day one. And people still associate him as one of the biggest speakers in the world. But he's been one of the biggest ones who's used speaking for much higher ticket price, ticket items that have really fueled his empires. And so anyway, tangent, but you understand how quickly I can spiral. And if you're leveraging it appropriately and speaking directly to clients that you've been trying to get on the phone, then it's a lot better than just trying to like work the room and shake everyone's hand as much as possible, just being a participant.
Yeah, I love that. And the light bulb's just gone off in my head when you're talking there, using Tony Robbins as an example. Great speaker, but he's not using speaking as a vehicle for himself. He's using a vehicle to get to the next stage. And actually that's what he's doing all along. And that light bulb just gone off for me when you're saying, what does success look like? And we can all relate back to 2020 when the speaking industry, plummeted straight away and people had to go on to do it on Zoom or Teams or Google Meet. But actually, if your money's only coming from speaking, you've got one avenue and you're cutting off all this other potential for customers on the other upside that you could be making on the back of it. And I think that's the powerful piece I've just heard you say there, which is really, really important, I think. I want to come back to something you mentioned as well, just before that.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's just the piece that I find people are missing again and again. And because they think that they need to build their speaking first, and then they'll think about, product, services, optimization. And I'm saying start with that from day one,
Yeah.
like build it from the beginning, and you'll be, much better off, at least just capturing leads. So yeah, go back to you.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So look, I want to go back to something you said about connecting emotionally, because you and I both know, and everyone who tells stories knows that stories are the thing that connect. That's the thing that we all buy into. So you said about connecting emotionally. So here's my issue. I'm selling a mug or some boring product. Actually, I've got to build a story around it. What is it you do within your remit to help build a real emotional connection, so people want to come back and work with you, with people in the future, not just say, hey, that was a great speech, but that was a great speech and they want to do something about it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it begins, your talk, when we're really talking about like when you've got 30, 45, 60 minutes, we're not talking about just a quick TED talk or something like a quick
Yeah.
pitch or something. So, but even in any context, what you're always trying to do when you connect with someone and connect with an audience is tell a story. So I always encourage people to open with your own story, a story about, that brings people right into it, that's going to like kind of, lead into the thing that you're talking about, but immediately just grabs their attention.
Yeah.
And whether you're sharing about a vulnerable time that you went through or a challenge you overcome or just anything, you're going to endear yourself more to this audience, if you are able to be more vulnerable or just to emotionally connect in a way,
Yeah.
about something, and then move into what you want to teach them, because now you've got their attention. And then after you've added value, and the main chunk of your talk, is going to kind of conclude with, if you want to get this free resource, like scan this code, do this thing real quick. I have, clients getting 80, 85% of their audiences now to just opt in,
Wow.
which is incredible,
Yeah.
conversion just for even for leads. And
Yeah.
then conclude with a story. So then you're not just leaving them feeling like, oh, I was just pitched. Oh, I was just that's all it was about. Now you bring it full circle. And
Yeah.
now you conclude with another story that really ties it all together, and emotional, whatever emotion you want them leaving on. And that's what makes a memorable talk. That's what makes people actually then, want to continue working with you. But you've already got them when you wanted them. If you wait and think, okay, well, yeah, they're going to go find me on LinkedIn, I'm sure they're going to go look at my website.
Yeah.
If they're at a conference and they're going to go see now 6 other speakers, or even if they're going to go have cocktails, like half of them aren't going to remember your name, like, some of them might, so getting them right in that moment to then opt in. So now you can email them. Now, like, you can make sure that you get on, they're connected on LinkedIn. Like, you can't assume that any of these social media platforms or that anyone else is going to be proactive about following up with you.
Yeah.
Every time you speak is your opportunity to make the most of it. So you want to just capture them there, and then, yes, of course, make a great emotional connection so that you're remembered. And when they get your follow-up things, or they get your quick survey or whatever, they're
Yeah.
going to be more moved to action. And, they might stay on your list for months or years, or
Yeah.
not everyone is going to buy.
Yeah.
But again, it's much better to fill that funnel, with 80% of that audience than 10, 20, 15% that you traditionally might get
Yeah.
from something else, or, that number is a lot lower when we're talking about digital audiences.
Yeah, I love that. So this is the real thing there, and I love the process you take people through there in terms of the story, the pitch, the story. But it's not just pitching; you're leaving people with something. That emotional connections there, and I think that's really key. So one of the things that you and I talked about before was why diverse and purpose-driven talent messaging is something that connects with the audience. I'd love to delve into that a bit, because I think when we talk about diversity and purpose-driven, people have different connotations in their mind. They hear different things. So I wonder, what is it for you? What does diverse and purpose-driven mean for you? And why is it an important message that we need to be talking about right now?
Yeah, well, I think when I, set out to focus at least my management efforts on diverse and purpose-driven talent, it's because I've seen a need for diverse speakers and thinkers. Both the research shows this again and again, and like how the power of it in companies and teams, et cetera, but in my experience in this industry, if there was a person of color added to the agency, they were by default added to the diversity category. That would be kind of how things would look or be,
Yeah.
and it just felt very, one dimensional. And my speakers by nature are diverse because they're either female or a person of color or
Yeah.
LGBT or whatever else, but they aren't all speaking about diversity. In fact, I don't know that any of my speakers, that's a main topic for them. They
Okay.
are in different fields and industries. So we need diverse speakers talking about marketing and AI
Yeah.
and the future of work. We don't need just old white men talking about all the business topics, and
Yeah.
then some diverse people talking about diversity and communications, and like
Yeah.
that's what they're allowed to speak about, and like what women speak about. And so it's just, like every industry, like everything, it's been an industry that's been dominated, by one
Yeah.
group,
Yeah.
and now there's so many different great minds and people in all the different fields, and we
Yeah.
just need all those different voices so
Yeah.
that when you have options for speakers, it's not 90% one way and maybe 10% other options. So it's still kind of that way to some
Yeah.
degree because
Yeah.
the competition remains the same, but there is so much value in these other points of view and these other perspectives and how they've approached things that, the better, more innovative companies have really adopted, and the research and all of that again just kind of
Yeah.
underscores how valuable it can be.
Yeah, and it's interesting actually. We've had a number of diversity conversations on this podcast, and they all stand out. Every podcast I've done stand out for different reasons, but I think when you're talking there is really key. The traditional business person has been that middle-aged white man, so to speak, and actually it's bringing a different picture, a different story to the storytelling, and actually we can actually get a message across there that people actually need to be considering the wider population, because actually we're all bringing talent to this, and I think that's the key piece on this.
I was following what you're saying, and I agree. I think there's the piece, I believe you're saying about bringing people together, like just
Yeah.
the idea of these events, this message is always going to be about inspiration, and it's always going to be, hopefully motivating, but people want more dimensions now,
Mm.
and they don't always have an opportunity. Not every company is going to be able to have a diverse music pool, or sorry, not music pool, but talent pool.
Yeah.
Not every company is going to have like opportunities to be doing all that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really key thing actually. So as we come towards the end of this podcast now, I think there's a whole load of messages I'm hearing there about why we should be using speaking in our business. I'm just thinking about the notes I've just made as we're talking, in terms of using speaking as a vehicle to really get us out there, but not using it to promote ourselves as a speaker per se, but actually using it as how do we promote our product, how do we get people on our list, and really connecting that vulnerability and that emotional impact, because that's the story build that people often forget when they're trying to drive a story. So I wonder, as we come to this, you must have seen lots of speakers in your time. What are the things that stand out for you in the speaking world you've been in that you said, hey, this is the real thing that connects people back to their audience? What are the gems that you've seen and you would just as a takeaway?
The real things that speakers are doing that
Yeah.
work best.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think telling individual stories rather than like just choosing. There's an inclination to talk about Gandhi or Disney, or like share stories of other luminaries, share stories of historical figures, people
Mm.
you may know or may not know. But I think people nowadays want that authenticity. So I
Yeah.
think then less about like making yourself seem incredible and all the incredible things that you did, and more again about that vulnerability, that authenticity, that
Yeah.
struggle that people don't see, that isn't celebrated or understood, because I think that's where you'll meet people where they're at. I
Yeah.
think a lot of times speakers start off very close to their audience, And, especially those that are trying to speak to clients and turn them into customers, like they that in that coaching world and that consulting world, like I was like you can be like me, but the greater distance that they become in their success, like a Tony
Yeah.
Robbins is so massively successful. Like I don't think a lot of people are going to his events and thinking like, oh, you're just like me, or like he was just like me like 5 years ago. But that's where he started. So
Mm,
the
mm,
speakers who were able to relate to their audience and not make them feel like, oh, this chasm has continued to grow. Forever the trope of the keynote speaker was the guy who climbed Everest, like the really, the Olympian, and like these people who've done incredible things. But it's like, and I can hit my sales goal. Like, why not? Like, and that's okay. That's just like an inspiration high that goes away
yeah.
because they're not really inspired that they can reach that goal. It's
Uh,
just a good story. So I think that's where we've seen, more inspiration, motivation imbued in these corporate topics, because
yeah.
people need like that same sort of lift, while
Yeah.
also understanding like really concrete ways to get there from someone who isn't that far ahead of them, or
Yeah.
is able to really translate it to what they need to do. So that's where people are great. And then, as a
Yeah.
speaker, you kind of have to keep evolving. Like you can be in a lane
Yeah.
of area, but your ideas, your books, your topics, your thought leadership needs to keep growing, because there's always going to be new authors and new topics and new things happening. And so you have to adapt and grow and evolve. So it's an iterative process.
Yeah, I love that, and there's a couple of things that resonated for me there. I work with a client at the moment, and they are often looking for speakers. And one thing their people manager in the company said to me is, "We don't want just big motivational speakers, because of course you leave people on a high, and that high drops off straight away the following day." And I think it really resonates when you said about that. We don't want the people who have scaled the mountain or won the gold at the Olympics. We want the people we can connect with as well, who have got a human story, and we can feel that we're just like them. And I think that's the bit I just take away from what you're saying there, actually, in terms of that. I think it was almost the difference between the hero versus the vulnerable piece. The vulnerability is the bit that really opens up that people feel more connected with.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So I love that. And then I love that other piece you mentioned as well about thought leadership. You've got to stay ahead of your game. You can't sit on your laurels and deliver the same old speech, because actually you're losing out, because there's other people coming around doing the similar things, and you're just going to be another one in the pile of people who've done the same thing before. So really great messages there.
Well, and this is where it all I like to think it comes full circle, because what allows you to stay in the game, to be engaged in your work, is
Yeah,
by offering products and services beyond your keynote,
yeah,
is by actually engaging with speaking as, an evolving business development tool. Because I've seen speakers who get to that point where they're like, great, I'm getting booked, this is the package. And then, like you said, they really just keep delivering the same sort of content, whether
yeah,
they tailor it to different audiences or not.
yeah,
But after so long, like if they're not doing that work in the field, if they're not still engaged in that way,
yeah,
I can see that they struggle more to, be as innovative in the future,
yeah,
or to, to, like you said, stay ahead.
yeah,
So I think by thinking about like not just, oh, speaking is how I don't have to do this thing anymore. Let engineer it towards what you want to do,
yeah,
engineer it towards what you want to do, but in the sense of like, cool, I want to build this new new sample of research, study per people that I'm going to use for my next book, because I'm really interested in exploring this now. And so
yeah,
that's where I'm going to like kind of steer my work. But that's obviously a privilege too, to be able to do that. But I think, again, that just is my point of like, diversify your portfolio, because it's
yeah,
going to help across all things, not just
yeah,
different channels of revenue, but
yeah,
how are you going to continue to adapt and evolve and be able to create new thought leadership or new products and services, if you're not also continuing to do that.
mm,
Just getting good at delivering keynotes is great, but that could be a short-lived career,
yeah.
without else anything else with it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Here's a question for you in that case. You must have seen lots of great speakers over time. And I asked that question about the things they do differently. But if you were to name one or two speakers where you think, hey, these guys really move the world. These are the people who are transforming the speaking industry through what you're saying. Can you name them? Would you be willing to talk about those people? Because I think they're the type of people that these type of audiences need to go listen to. You know, who are the top guys out there that they need to be following in this world?
Yeah, it's that's impossible. It's like it's so hard, even when people ask me like books and things, books and speakers. I'm so close.
Yeah.
It's really difficult. I do a lot of work with Impact 11. Like it's led by four really big professional speakers here in the U.S.
Okay.
And they do boot camps and have a community and master classes for speakers at all stages of their career. And I've had the privilege to go and be part of their panel and work with their community quite a lot. So like I think what they're doing and helping instruct and grow this community is really innovative, but there's a lot of amazing people doing that sort of work who are either gotten to that high level as a professional speaker or who has had some relationship to the industry. I think I'm kind of unique more and like I really like helping people launch like their business around this business and this growth around, as speaking being the primary platform, but as just that as what it is, just that jumping off point. So I
Yeah.
don't know. There's some amazing people that I'm working with, like Paul Mobley, who a lot of people didn't know is a celebrity photographer who uses his photos in his presentation. And, like we're talking about, I call it a closing keynote because it is meant to just make you feel good and uplifted. And people need that. They need a reason to kind of round out their experience at an event, but he's not your opening keynote, get you all energized, to go connect and do great things together kind of guy. And like just understanding where your niche is. I think there's people who like pop, like there was Eric Wall forever who did art on stage. Like if you've got something unique, like there can be these kind of innovative things that now, oh, everyone wants to do that. Like they all want to do something in like live on stage or like make that part more interactive. But the truth is it's all about that connection. It's
Yeah.
so much less about that technology. You could stand on stage with no slides, tell great stories, and be the absolute best speaker.
Yes.
So it's really just if you're going to enhance it with visuals or like doing polls with the audience or any way that you're going to facilitate something different, it should be adding to the experience. It should you can't have text on screen while you're talking over it. Like I see a lot of these
Yeah.
mistakes with
Took
people
it
who
up.
try to
Yeah.
do too much. They try to cram it all in or
Yeah.
put the text up on the slide and then they're reading the slide. Like I don't
Yeah.
need you to read it to me. I can
Yeah.
read that in 2 seconds and it takes you 30 seconds to basically tell it to me. So why would you be wasting your time like that?
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's truly impossible for me to say there's like one or two speakers to go look at because there's so many and there's
Yeah.
new ones I meet all the time. But I think if you surround yourself with peers and a community of speakers, whether it's Impact 11 or anywhere, like you mentioned PSA in the UK, there's
Yeah.
NSA in the US, it's
Yeah.
National Speakers Association, and they've got all sorts of chapters. I think you'd be able to just pick up so much from what other people are doing and how they're doing it. And you don't have to role model any one person. I think that's actually, there is a danger in only listening or being coached by other speakers because they tend to have a style
Yeah.
that then you might, be tempted to emulate. And I think you should really try to pick and choose and take the elements of all different styles that you like and create your own and really make sure it's authentic to you. But anyway, I digress.
No,
So,
but those are all really, really interesting things actually, and it's interesting actually because as I asked that question about naming one speaker, I knew I was going to put you on the spot with that actually, but I'd asked the question by the time I thought about that. So thank you for your answer there, and I think there's some great points there in terms of launching your business, surrounding yourself with peers. I think is a really good thing. We all talk about that in business. Surround yourself with those peers of where you want to be, and then you'll get there. And I think there's a big message there. So I think that's a great thing. If you were to go back in time and talk about how you got into this business as a final step, what advice would you give somebody as the number one thing they need to do that you would do differently when you started out? You would say, hey, this is what my learning would be, so I would change it or do something differently. What would that be?
yeah, I mean, I think I would do more of this earlier on,
Yeah.
more of both trying to get my own voice out there and more of trying to, learn more independently as much as I could on, other new people. For a lot of my early career, I was, more like in a publishing house or like working with publishing houses. So I had a discrete list of people to work with. And, like I didn't have to look too far outside of that. But I think it's really important to be curious and open-minded and to understand all the different paths where you can grow within an industry or within it, like understanding all the different players and people. So I think I would just say, yeah, take some time to kind of see the broader picture, like who you're working with and who they're working with. And so you don't feel like the path is so narrow. And that's why a lot of people, I think end up stuck or feel like they have to start all over, in a new industry or something.
Yeah, I love that. That's useful. Really useful. Thank you. Blair, it's been really a pleasure to talk to you. I really enjoyed it. We've got your contact details here, but if you could just reiterate, where can people find you if they wanted to go and talk about what you're talking about and learn more from you? Where's the best place to go? Because obviously we've got lots of details, but where's the best place to find you?
Sure. Yeah, well, you can always find me on LinkedIn, Blair Bryant Nichols, and on Instagram, and the same. And also go to BBN as in baboon without the vowels, bbncreativemanagement.com, and you can check out the services page and book a 30-minute free meeting with me. And hopefully, if you're thinking about speaking or building your business, that should give you some guidance on what next step you may want to take. So yeah, that's where you can find me.
Wonderful. Thank you, BBN. I love that. Baboon without the vowels. I love that. We're going to remember that one. Blair, thank you. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to catching up again in the future and sharing this podcast with the world. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks, Phil.
Thanks. I want to ask listeners, what is it your niche is and how can you focus on that? So probably the question in simple terms is, Blair talks about focusing on your niche. What is your niche? And if you don't know it, what could it be? And who is your core customer?